Hey everybody, this is Dream, and today we have a nice 13-game Major League Baseball slate. This is an absolute insane slate. So before I get started, can you guys smash that like and subscribe button? It really does help the channel a lot. I really do appreciate it. With that said, let's look at this slate. So first, we're going to look at the weather here. Hang on, I'm trying to pull that up. It didn't want to pull up on me. Hang on 1 second, guys. Where'd it go? MLB weather. Here we go. Sorry. So for this slate, we really only have one game that has a weather concern, and that's the San Diego Kansas City game. But I do think it ends up playing. It may just be a late start. So with that said, let's get into our pitchers. Let me make sure this looks okay. So anyhow, for pitching, there's a lot of decent plays. There's nobody that really jumps off the page as a great play. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 guys that all have decent upside today. Then we have a couple, one extreme play, and then 2 Hail Mary options as well. So let's go ahead and get into it. I will kind of start where I think there's the best options. Stroman for the Yankees. He's a pretty good value today against San Francisco. He's been solid for the season, though he does have a low floor, but his upside is still pretty good with his average strikeout rate. He's not really gonna differentiate from most of the other pitchers here, but he's probably one of the safer options on the slate. I also think Brian Wu has a little bit of upside today for Seattle against the Angels. He's also been somewhat inconsistent in his 4 games so far. He's had 2 good games and 2 bad ones. Um, Ironically, his good games have been against the Yankees and Kansas City. His bad games have been against Washington and Oakland. But he still has some decent upside here against the Angels, so I think he's a viable option. Then we'll look at Tanner Hoke for Boston. He's got a favorable matchup against Detroit. However, I think a 15 to 25 fantasy point range is most likely, and there's just a lot of pitchers that fit into that kind of box today. But he has one of the better matchups. He's one of better strikeout rates on the slate as well. Maybe he has a good situation against the Nationals, though his strikeout rate is not quite as good as Hoax's, and he's not been quite as consistent. But he definitely has some upside today. And then kind of Walker Buehler is in a weird spot because he's only pitched 4 games so far and he's only had one good game in that stretch. But his pitching count is growing, and so if he can get a solid game here against one of the weakest teams in baseball, then he can definitely pay off here. So he is a GPP play, but he's definitely risky. Uh, I also think Dylan Case is a decent play today, even though it's a tough match with San Diego. He's been probably one of the best strikeout pitchers on this entire slate, so that gives him some upside, but he's also the most expensive option I think you should consider. Ronaldo Lopez for Atlanta also looks interesting today. He's been fantastic for most of the season, but his strikeout rate has been very inconsistent, and that has limited his fantasy upside here. But he's got a very good earned run rate, so it's hard to hate him here against Oakland. But I do think a couple guys from Oakland could potentially hit a home run, but he needs to get enough strikeouts to really pay off here. Then we're going to look at Barrios for Toronto. Um, I think he ends up in the 18 to 22 fantasy point range as well. He's got a favorable match against Pittsburgh. Uh, he does have a lower floor than some of the other guys that I think are decent, but he's definitely in play today. And then Severino for the Mets against Arizona. Now, Arizona can definitely be a good team at times, so he's definitely high risk, high reward. His strikeout rate's been a little bit better than some of the other pitchers I've already mentioned, so he's in play, but he's not got the best matchup. The extreme GPP play today is Montgomery for Arizona. He's got an interesting matchup against the Mets. I think he has some upside, but he's definitely not a super high scoring option today. And then I have 2 Hail Marys, one being Jordan Hicks for San Francisco. Now, the Yankees have tendency to hit a bunch of home runs at times, and so he definitely carries a ton of risk here, especially considering he's been giving up some home runs the last 3 games. But he's not a huge home run giver upper, so I think he does have some potential today, but it's definitely a Hail Mary type of situation, and I wish he was a little bit cheaper. Tobias Myers for Milwaukee is also somewhat interesting because he's facing the weakest team on the slate in the White Sox. He doesn't have a super high K rate though, so that's a concern, and he doesn't really have a high ceiling at all. But I wish he was around $5,000 instead of $7,000 because it makes him extremely hard to roster, especially on a slate with so many average options without a lot of great options. So let's go ahead and get into our catchers. Now I've got more bats than I typically have on this because of the fact that there's 13 games. So instead of having 4 batters, I'm going to have probably 6 or 7 for most positions, but I might have a couple extra just because of the quality of some of these matchups here. So for catcher though, William Contreras does jump off the page as the best option here. He's got good metrics and he follows in a really solid spot here, though he has not been good the last few games. I do think he has a very top tier option matchup here against Fetty, so I think he's a good spot. Now he's gonna be hard to roster, but he's definitely viable. Whoever starts for Atlanta, whether it be Travis d'Arnaud or Sean Murphy, will be in play. Murphy has struggled since he's gotten back from his injuries, but I do think he has good potential to break out at some point, and he's not going to be $3,700 forever. So, take advantage of his price while he's there. Obviously, d'Arnaud could fit in here as well if he was to draw the start instead. Adley Rutschman from Baltimore does have some good metrics for this game. Not as great as Contreras, but he's a good contrarian option. And so he's definitely worth a look there. And then Ryan Jeffers from Minnesota. He's a solid, safe play here. He's been hitting home runs pretty decent this season, and he has solid potential to have a multi-hit game. Connor Wong, Cal Raleigh, and Yanir Diaz also have some potential at this position. Looking at first base, Ohtani and Freeman jump off the page of the top overall 2 plays, though they are fairly expensive, and Freeman is $1,000 cheaper than Ohtani, but he doesn't have the home run upside that Ohtani does. But I do like Vlad Jr. a lot today, as he does draw good metrics for this game. He has really struggled, though, off and on throughout the season, but he does have multi-hit potential today, so he's definitely worth a look. I also like Matt Olson as a good contrarian option as well. Though he has struggled for most of the season, he has gotten better recently. But a couple other guys that we could look at that are a little bit cheaper. Yandy Diaz does have good metrics for this game for Tampa Bay. He has hit the ball pretty well recently, with the exception of a couple of games here. But he had a couple string of games where he hit multi-hits, so I think he's got a lot of upside in this matchup here. Reyes for San Diego, he can play at first or second base. He's a good solid play. He's been absolutely fantastic since he's been at San Diego, and so I think he continues to be a solid option. Pasquantino for Kansas City is in play today. Even though he does carry a higher price tag than I would like for him, he is definitely a good Kansas City stack will fit him in, but he's definitely high risk because of the matchup. And then Berger for Miami. He can also play at third base, but he looks like a really solid option today, and he's priced pretty fairly. You could also look at Ryan O'Hearn and Nate Lowe at this position. Quite a bit of good options at first base today, but none that are super cheap, unfortunately. Looking at second base, Ozzy Albies does jump off the page as the best option on the slate. However, he has struggled since he's been back, but he is getting a lot of hits now. He hasn't hit a home run in a while, but he does draw good metrics here, and his prices elevated, but it's not as terrible as it could be. Looking at Brandon Lowe for Tampa Bay, he's an interesting spot here. He has not really hit the ball well, but the last couple of games he's had some big fantasy point games, and I look for him to continue to try to do that. And this is a great matchup for him to do that in, so I think he's a solid play. Altuve looks interesting today, though he's overpriced, and I think Albies is a little bit safer just because his price is cheaper. Same with Simeon. He's a little bit cheaper too, and he's a good contrarian off of Ozzy or Jose Altuve. So Reyes can also play at this position, and then I also like Eduardo Julian as a home run option today, as he has been absolutely up and down all season, but he has some really awesome home run metrics today, so he's definitely worth a look. Zach Geloff and Davis Schneider can also fit here. Now, I really like Schneider a lot. I think he's a good fit in outfield too if you want to pay down for Lowe or Julian at this second base. But you could stick him in second base or in the outfield, and he has some of the best metrics on this entire slate. So he is a core play for me. Looking at third base right now, Rafael Devers jumps off the page as one of the best plays on the slate. He's been hitting the ball very well for 2 weeks, but then the last 5 or 6 games he's been a little bit hit or miss, but he did have a multi-hit game against Baltimore in the last series. I look for him to have some opportunity for a home run as the metrics are really good. Austin Riley is a good contrarian play off of him, and then Paredes is a cheaper option for Tampa Bay, as he does have a tough matchup, but he does look like a decent play on the slate. He's been hitting the ball pretty well. Machado is another guy for San Diego that I think has some utility today, but he's very contrarian. For some value play here, Berger for Miami can play here at third base as well. Bregman also looks solid for Houston, though it is a tougher matchup. Rojas for Seattle is in an interesting spot here at his price point. He's not a huge home run guy, but he can get some multi-hit games occasionally, and he definitely gets some upside in that situation. And then Ortiz for Minnesota or for Milwaukee, I'm sorry, at third base. He really draws good metrics today. I really like him a lot, and I think he's a good value play at third. In fact, he's probably one of my favorite value plays on the slate when it comes to sub $3,500 options. So he's going to kind of squeeze in there at third base from that perspective. Looking at our shortstops, Mookie Betts can top tier option. Also, Gunnar Henderson. I actually like Gunnar Henderson a little bit more as he's got more home run upside today. But both of them look really solid. Corey Seager also looks solid. He's been absolutely crazy the last week or so. So I look for him to be an option on the slate, and he's a little bit cheaper than the top two guys. And then O'Neal Cruz has some absolutely fantastic metrics for this game. He's got a lot of power, and he hits the ball pretty hard. And when he does that, and he's in the right situation, home runs tend to happen. So I do like his upside there. Willie Adames is a kind of contrarian option today, as is Bo Bichette. There's not a ton of super cheap options at this position, so you're going to have to probably pay up a little bit here. But those guys all have some utility. Looking at outfielders, I'm just going to kind of show you this instead because I'm going to show you stacks here in a second. So I'm just going to do this here. So we have Ohtani, Chisholm Jr., Kyle Tucker, and Yordan Alvarez being the top overall guys. Of these four, I actually like Alvarez the best, but I think Chisholm Jr. is a good contrarian option as well. For the next four, Duran, Soto, Riley Green, and Yelich, all four of these guys have really good metrics, but they're just underneath these top four guys overall. And then some value plays here. Corbin Carroll, Wenzel Perez, Willie Abreu, and George Springer. I love all four of these dudes. I think they're probably the top options for just normal price guys, and then some contrarian guys, Buxton, Reynolds, and Adolis Garcia. I will point out that Abreu is one of my favorite plays on the slate because of his price point. He's also been pretty solid the last couple weeks, so he's definitely draws some. He's having some good opportunities here. So let's move into our sub 3,000 plays here. So Nick Gordon for Miami, Von Grisham for Boston, Jose Siri for Tampa Bay, Arenado for Tampa Bay, Otto Lopez for Miami, J.P. Crawford for Seattle. Now, I'm going to mention J.P. Crawford has really good metrics today. He was very close to being as a top tier option for his position at shortstop. Then looking at Jackson Chourio from Milwaukee is kind of a contrarian play as well. Let's look at our stacks here. So for the top two stacks, the Dodgers and the Braves. For the Dodgers, Ohtani, Betts, and Freeman, Pages, and Hayward. You could also mix in Lux here as a good option, but he definitely carries a lot of risk, and it's a little bit safer to go with these guys. However, you might want to mix out Betts or Ohtani and switch in Lux if just to save money. For Atlanta, Albies, Riley, Murphy, and then either Olson or Arcia or Ozuna or Duvall. I'm kind of leaning to Arcia and Ozuna right now, but it just kind of depends on how you want to build that. For Toronto, Boston, Cleveland, and Baltimore and Texas, these are all really good stacks, and I think they have a lot of potential today. Toronto looks literally awesome today with Vlad Jr., Bichette, Springer, Schneider, and Turner. The other half of the lineup looks terrible, so that's a very easy stack to consider. For Boston, Devers, Duran, Abreu, Wong, and then either Refsnyder or Grissom. It just depends on how you want to save money there. For Cleveland, Jimenez, Fry, Freeman, Rodriguez, and Ramirez. This is a tough stack to really fit in, but a couple cheap pieces are cheap, so it's definitely doable. For Baltimore, Henderson, Rutschman, O'Hearn, Mullins, and Santander. Kind of a rough stack, but it's decent. And then for Texas, Seager, Simeon, Garcia, Lowe, and Tavares. This is an expensive stack, but it is definitely a decent stack on the slate. The next group here, Houston, Minnesota, San Diego, Milwaukee, Seattle, Miami. These are very higher risk stacks, but they definitely have potential today. I do like the Minnesota stack and the San Diego stack quite a bit. And Milwaukee looks kind of contrarian, as does Seattle, Miami, and Houston. The bottom stacks here are the Yankees, Tampa Bay, Detroit, New York Mets, Kansas City, Pittsburgh, Arizona, San Francisco, these are teams that I do like the pitchers against them, but these are stacks that are okay, and I think that they have some potential. But you might want to go like 3 player stacks with these guys and just use the first 3 guys I've listed, and then fill in the other players if you're going to go up against these pitchers. But there's still decent stacks on the slate. Looking at the bottom 4 or 5, Oakland, LA Angels, Washington, Chicago White Sox, and Colorado. These are Hail Mary stacks. They got the best pitchers against them. They have the toughest road to having solid games. Though I do think Oakland has a couple guys that could hit some home runs. So you're looking at like 1 or 2, or maybe at 3 at the most, player stacks with these teams. So I did do some top metrics today here. So Schneider has the top overall home run upside for the slate, followed by Judge, Otani, Alvarez, and Soto. We do like Freddie Freeman and Willie Abreu and David Fry as good value as good options for home run options as well, but they're a little bit riskier. For multi-hit games, I like Altuve, Betts, Devers, Bouchard for Colorado, Riley, Julian, and Albies. And then for a couple other guys that have really good home run metrics today, these are they're not all boomer bust because they all have good metrics for getting hits too, but they do have good home run potential. Alonso, Gunnar Henderson, the top overall ones there. Brett Brooker, Chisholm Jr., Zach Geloff, Cal Raleigh, Byron Buxton, Austin Riley, Matt Olson, and Shea Langurlays. These are guys that I might use as one-off if I just have the right amount of money for them, and then trying to kind of Hail Mary it for